Whispers in the bamboo. The first time Leon heard the whispering, she thought it was the wind thin, snaking through the bamboo groves like a serpent of cold breath. The forest surrounding Bataya village had always made her uneasy. It wasn't the rustling leaves or the way the fog clung low to the earth at dusk. It was the silence between sounds, the unnatural quiet that seemed to press on her ears like a held breath. Bataya was the kind of village that didn't appear on most maps. Tucked deep in a mountain valley of northern Luzon, its houses were wooden, weather-worn, and bent slightly forward like old men with secrets. Outsiders rarely came. Those who did often didn't stay long. Leon was only 13, but she had seen enough to understand what people meant when they called her village cursed. People didn't speak of the ghost forest unless they had to, but everyone respected it and feared it. Her grandmother Lola Salve was one of the few who dared to utter its name aloud. "Never go past the 5th row of bamboo," Lola said one misty evening as they sat by the hearth. "Even in daylight, that's where the Hatabala roams." Leon had heard the name before. A demon, a spirit of rage and sorrow said to haunt the forest ever since the war, when villagers were dragged into the woods and never returned. "But is it real?" she asked. Lola's eyes clouded. "I once lost a cousin to the whispers." He followed a voice calling his name and vanished. Leon swallowed. "Maybe he got lost." "No." Lola's voice hardened. "The forest takes, and the Hatabala waits." That night, Leon dreamed of bamboo, endless green whispering stalks. A voice low and broken called her name again and again, Leon, Leon, until she woke soaked in sweat. She tried to shake it off, until she heard the whisper again while awake. It came from beyond the water pump near the 5th row. She was fetching water before dinner, the sun a dull red bruise over the ridge, when the wind died suddenly. All the birds, the insects, the sounds of the forest stopped, and in that silence came a faint, breathy murmur. "Leonor," she turned so fast she almost dropped the bucket. Nothing, but the voice was unmistakable. She ran back home, heart thudding. "Was someone calling me?" she asked her brother Thomas later that night, near the pump. He looked up from carving his toy boat. "No one goes near there at dusk, you know that. But I heard, probably just the wind, or, you're getting sick." Maybe he was right, but the whisper came again, the next day and the next. Each time it was clearer, closer, and always near the 5th row of bamboo. The worst part, the voice sounded like her mother's, but her mother had died 3 years ago, caught in a sudden forest fire. The adults had said it was an accident, but some villagers whispered she had gone too deep into the forest. Now her voice called to Leon, soft, urgent. "Anak, tulungan mo ako. My child, help me." Was it a trick of grief, a dream she couldn't wake from? Or was her mother really there? That question burned in her chest until one morning Leon couldn't resist any longer. She told no one, just said she was going to pick guavas by the ridge. Then she stepped past the 5th row of bamboo. The change was instant. The air grew heavy like thick smoke before rain. Bamboo stalks rose higher than she remembered, bent inward like ribs in a cage. The ground was soft, almost too soft, as if the forest were breathing beneath her feet. She walked deeper past fallen branches and gnarled roots. Her skin prickled. The light dimmed, though it was barely noon. Then she heard it again. "Leanne, this way." It was closer now and impossible to ignore. She pushed through a curtain of vines and found herself in a small clearing. At its center was a stone altar half swallowed by moss. Burnt offerings lay scattered, withered flowers, broken candles, and old bones. And on the altar a photograph. Leon's blood ran cold. It was a picture of her mother smiling in front of their house, holding baby Thomas. She stepped closer. Something rustled behind her. She turned. A figure stood among the bamboo, tall, thin, too pale, its face hidden beneath long black hair. Its arms hung limp, but its fingers were too long, curling like roots. "Nanay," Leon whispered. The figure twitched, then lunged. Leon screamed and ran, branches clawing at her arms, thorns tearing her skirt. The forest grew confusing, like it shifted around her. Paths led back into themselves. No matter which way she turned, she found herself back at the clearing. The figure was still there, watching, until it smiled. Its mouth split wide unnaturally, so stretching from ear to ear, revealing teeth not meant for humans, black, jagged, glistening. "Come home," it rasped in her mother's voice. Leon dropped the photo and bolted again. This time she didn't stop. She followed the rising slope, ignored the scratches and aching lungs, until she burst out of the forest and collapsed near the village spring. When she opened her eyes, the sky was dark. The stars blinked coldly above. Her arms were bleeding. Her knees were torn. But she was alive. Barely. After that day, things grew worse. Lynn stopped eating. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure smile. Her mother's voice haunted her waking hours. Lola Salvi knew something was wrong. She tried to burn sage, hung garlic, sprinkled salt, but Leanne could feel the forest watching her. One evening, as the fog rolled in, she saw it again, standing at the edge of the trees. That same figure, unmoving, waiting. "Hatabala," Lola whispered when Leanne finally told her everything. "It's found you." "Why me?" "Because you listened. That's how it begins." Lola gathered the village elders that night. They met in hushed voices, burning herbs and whispering prayers in dialects older than memory. A ritual was planned, a sealing, but it had to be done at the altar before the next full moon. That gave them only 3 days. The night before the ritual, Thomas disappeared. His bed was empty, his shoes were missing. Leon found the window open and footprints leading toward the forest. She didn't wait. With only a flashlight and her slingshot, she followed the tracks. The fog swallowed her quickly. The forest groaned and pulsed like something alive. "Thomas," she called, "please." A voice answered, "Just here. You are..." She ran, but it wasn't her brother. It was the Hatabala. She found him near the altar, kneeling, staring at the photograph like it had spoken to him. "Thomas," she cried. He looked at her, but his eyes were cloudy blank. "Nana is calling me," he whispered. "She's not dead. She said she's waiting." Leon grabbed his arm. "It's not her, it's not..." The forest howled. The Hatabala emerged. This time it showed its full face, twisted, stitched together with human and demon features. Eyes of black flame, lips whispering in 100 voices at once. Leon stepped in front of Thomas. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, trembling. But it laughed, a sound like cracking bones. "You came willingly," it hissed. "Your soul was offered. You are mine." Then it reached out, and the flashlight exploded in her hand. Darkness swallowed them. But in that darkness, Leon remembered her grandmother's words. "The Hatabala feeds on memory, on grief, but it cannot stand the truth." She gritted her teeth and screamed, not in fear, but in love. "My mother is dead. She's at peace, and you'll never have me." The forest shook. The Hatabala shrieked, clutching its head as if her words burned. Leon grabbed Thomas and hurled the pouch of salt Lola had given her at the altar. The earth cracked. The wind reversed. A blinding light burst from the photo. The Hatabala wailed as it was pulled backward, sucked into the altar, screaming curses in a dozen lost tongues. Then, a sullen silence. Real silence. Not that choking hush, but the soft hum of crickets. The gentle breeze of a normal night. Leon collapsed Thomas in her arms. He blinked up at her, dazed. Did we make it?" She nodded, tears spilling down her face. The forest was no longer watching. But as they turned back toward the village, Leon couldn't help but glance once more at the altar. The photo was gone, and the bamboo was whispering again. The eyes in the fog. The forest was quiet for 3 days. After the ritual, after the light, after the scream, everything around Bataya seemed to exhale. Birds returned to the trees. The fog lifted earlier than usual. People walked near the edge of the forest without shuddering. But it didn't last. And Leon knew it wouldn't. She sat on the bamboo floor of her family's stilted house knees, pulled to her chest, listening to Thomas hum while playing with his toy boat just as if nothing had happened. He didn't remember the altar, or the whispers, or the Hatabala's voice sliding into his ears like cold breath. But Leon remembered. She remembered everything. And most of all, she remembered what she saw when the light burst from the photo right before the demon vanished. For a split second behind the Hatabala, something had looked at her, not the demon. Something worse. Eyes, dozens. Some glowing red, others sunken and lifeless. All peering through the cracks in the bamboo stalks like watchers behind a curtain. And then they were gone. She hadn't told anyone. Not Lola, not Thomas, not the elders. Because deep in her bones she knew something had changed. The Hatabala hadn't been killed, only sealed. And the eyes. They belonged to something older. That night the fog returned. Thicker, hungrier, and it brought the eyes with it. It started with the animals. Dogs wouldn't go outside. Chickens stopped laying. Even the forest birds, so noisy at dusk, went silent. Then came the nightmares. Half the village woke up screaming. Some people claimed they saw themselves in their dreams, but older dead or walking with their skin peeled back. Lola Salve, ever watchful, gathered Leon and Thomas to sleep in her room, salt lines drawn around the walls. But the fog crept in anyway, seeping through floorboards, curling under doors. On the fifth night, someone saw the first eye. Old man Ernesto was walking back from the river with his grandson when the fog rolled over the footpath. He told the child to run. When the boy reached the village, he was pale and crying. They took Lolo, he gasped. The eye took him. People went searching, but all they found was Ernesto's hat, still warm, still dry. No footprints, only a thin trail of red water leading into the trees. The next morning, Leon heard whispering again. Not from the forest. From her mirror, she stared at her reflection as her braids swung gently on her shoulder. Then from the glass. Do you see them, child of the curse? She froze. The reflection's lips hadn't moved, but the voice was inside her head, no beneath it. Her reflection's eyes blinked, but she hadn't. Leon slammed the mirror face down on the table. Behind her, the door creaked. She whirled. Nothing, but the air was heavy again. And the fog was already sliding down the hills like wet fingers. The elders met again, this time with fear in their voices. The Hatabala wasn't alone, said Apo Gregorio, the oldest man in Bataya. He was just the gatekeeper to what someone asked, to the ones beneath. Lola Salve stood up. There's a name. It's not spoken lightly, but if the seal was broken, we must name it, or be taken in silence. Leon's stomach tightened. The name is Matangdalam, Lola whispered. The deep eyes. A silence fell over the hut. Even the crickets outside went still. Apo Gregorio nodded slowly. They are watchers, sleepers beneath the roots of the bamboo, waiting to awaken through pain, memory, and sight. If they are looking now, the village is no longer safe. Can they be stopped? Someone asked. No one answered, because they all knew you can't blind what was born to watch. That night, Thomas disappeared again, but this time there were no footprints. Only fog, and one long scratch across the wooden wall, like a fingernail had traced its way inside the house. Leon screamed. They searched every hut, every field. Then they heard it, a scream far distant coming from the old schoolhouse near the edge of the forest. They ran. The school had been abandoned since the fire 2 years ago. No one dared enter after the floor caved in. But the scream was unmistakable. It was Thomas. Wait, Leon shouted, breaking from the crowd. She was first to reach the door, and the fog inside was black, not white. It shimmered like oil, and it pulsed with something alive. She stepped inside, and the world bent. The desks were upside down, the blackboard written in ash. Symbols, not letters, glowed faintly on the walls. And in the corner, P. Manosundawarn, eyes, all sizes, dozens, watching her from the ceiling, from inside the broken lockers, from the window frames, frozen, unblinking. And in the center of the room was a chair. Thomas sat in it, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut. Leon ran to him, but her foot hit something. A mirror, She looked down, and her reflection was missing its eyes. "Do not look," a voice whispered behind her. She turned. A woman stood there, tall, hair white as bone. Her eyes were closed, but shadows leaked from under her lids. "Who are you?" Leon asked. "I was like you once," the woman said. "Curious, brave, foolish." Her voice was like dry leaves and bells. "I saw them, and now I guide others before they fall too far. You can help me save my brother." "Yes, but there's a price." "What tin and a sister my friend turn. You must let them see you, let them feed." Leon hesitated. "Will it hurt?" The woman smiled, but not kindly. "Worse, it will remember you." Leon looked at Thomas again. His face was pale, but tears leaked from the corners of his sewn-shut eyes. She turned to the woman. "Do it." The woman reached out and touched Leon's forehead. Pain. Searing, white, needle-thin pain. 1,000 eyes opened behind her eyes. Memories flooded her, but they weren't hers. A girl drowning in a bamboo well. A boy eaten from the inside out by fog. A child whose eyes turned to glass. Voices screamed inside her skull. But she held on. She held on. Then silence. And the woman was gone. And the fog was lifting. Thomas gasped. His stitches had vanished. His eyes opened. He blinked at her. "Leon." She cried. But before they could move, the eyes blinked all at once and vanished into smoke. They never found the woman again. No footprints, no signs. But from that day forward, Leon could see them. Everywhere. Eyes in puddles, eyes in glass, eyes behind trees. Always watching. She wore sunglasses during the day, covered mirrors at night. But the worst were her dreams. Because now she dreamed of them. And worse, they dreamed of her. Lola Salvi prepared another ritual. This time to bind Leon's soul to the earth so she wouldn't be fully pulled through the veil. But it wasn't enough. The fog deepened. The villagers began to vanish, one by one, quietly, cleanly, always leaving behind one thing, a single round wet spot on the floor, as if an eye had rested there. Leon began to notice something else. The eyes were following a pattern. They weren't just watching, they were mapping, preparing, like a hunter waiting for the perfect time to pounce. And one night, when she stared too long into a bucket of water, she saw it. A face. Her own face. But not hers. The skin was cracked. The eyes were filled with stars shifting galaxies of color and madness. And it spoke. "You are the door now." Then the bucket shattered. The next morning, Lola Salvi was gone. No struggle, no blood. Just her rosary, floating in her teacup. Leon didn't cry. She couldn't. The eyes had seen her grief. And now they were inside her. She heard them whisper in other people's voices. Sometimes her father's. Sometimes children she'd never met. The forest no longer looked real. It pulsed. It breathed. And in its breath, Leon heard the truth. The deep eyes were not just spirits. They were roots, buried beneath the village since long before Bataya existed. Their mouths were under the soil. Their tongues were fog. Their eyes. Suriname were people. People who had seen too much. People like her. And they wanted her to see more. A final vision came the night before the eclipse. She saw the altar again, cracked, bleeding light, and in the center her mother. But not the way she remembered. This time her mother's eyes were stitched shut, but she was screaming. And behind her the Hatabala stirred, not dead, not gone, only sleeping. And the eclipse would wake him. Len woke up screaming. And the fog had already reached her window. The village bell rang, but this time it rang backward. The sound bent the air. People collapsed, eyes burst in glass jars. Leanne ran. She knew where to go, back to the altar, where it all began. She found it cracked, glowing, and beside it a book. Bound in vines, pages of bark and hair. It pulsed when she touched it, opened itself, and inside drawings, spells, rituals, warnings. The final page was blank, until her blood dripped onto it. Then words appeared. The door has seen, the forest remembers, you are the vessel. Leanne screamed. The fog rose, and in it, 1,000 eyes blinked open. Footsteps without a body. It began with the sound of footsteps. Not heavy, not fast. Just the slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap of bare feet on bamboo floorboards, each step dragging slightly as if the walker was not entirely there. The villagers of Bataya had long learned to fear silence. But now it was the sound, small, subtle wrong that crept beneath their doors and into their dreams. They called it the walking shadow. It came only after midnight. It walked around the houses once, always once, then vanished. No one ever saw it, only heard it, until one night someone opened the door and vanished too. Leon didn't sleep anymore. Since the book revealed its message, "You are the vessel," the fog had not left the village. It hung thick like spider webs during the day and became heavy and humming by night. She was changing. She felt it in her bones. Cold when others were warm, hungry when others were full. And worse, she heard the footsteps before anyone else. She'd be lying still, eyes shut, counting her breaths. Then the sound would come. Tap, tap. But instead of moving past the steps, would pause outside her window and breathe. Once, twice, then move on. Leanne said nothing until someone opened the door. It was Apo Gregorio, the oldest living soul in Bataya. He had survived 2 wars of fire and a typhoon, but not the walking shadow. They found his cane leaning against his doorway, perfectly upright. His lantern still burned. The tea on his table still steamed. But Apo was gone, and written on the inside of his bamboo wall in something wet and black, "I see now." The elders called a meeting, but only 5 showed up. Lola Salvi was gone. Gregorio, too. Another 2 had left the village silently in the night, their homes abandoned, the chickens dead in the coops. "We need to leave," someone whispered. "Go where another snapped." The fog follows. The eyes know. You cannot run from watchers who live in the roots. Leanne said nothing, but something inside her stirred, because deep beneath the fear, beneath the cold, there was pull. The book had not vanished, it followed her. Sometimes it was under her pillow, other times under her bedroll. Once she found it in her rice bowl. She never opened it again, but it always opened for her. The pages now dripped ink like blood, and one line was always legible: "The shadow follows the vessel." The next time she heard the footsteps, Leanne waited. She held her breath, counted them. 1, 2, 3. They paused. Outside her window. She gripped her sling tightly, a pouch of salt tied at her waist, a silver blade in her hand, one Lola had once used to ward off spirits during childbirth. The footsteps started again, but not past the window. This time they turned. Toward her door, Leanne stood and opened it. Nothing. No shadow. No demon. Only fog. And then, I fluttered. Crack. The sound came from her roof. She rushed outside and saw it. Footprints. Wet, bare. Running up the bamboo wall and across the roof, beams like a spider. No body. No weight. Just prints. Leanne stared in horror as the prints continued across her roof, turned sharply, and ran back down the wall again. But no one was there. The prints ended right at her feet, and then a breath kissed her cheek. Hot, sour, wet. She didn't scream. She swung the silver blade. It met air, then turned to iron. The fog shivered, and she saw eyes not in the trees, not in the mirrors, but floating in midair above her house, watching her, following her blade, reacting. She told Tomas the next morning. He hadn't heard anything. He never did, but his eyes were darker now, pupils dilated, as if he was seeing something that wasn't there. "I had a dream," he said softly. "You were walking, but you weren't you. You didn't blink. You didn't speak." Leanne felt the chill again. What was I doing? Looking into people's windows, one by one, counting. She swallowed. And what did I do when I finished? Thomas hesitated. You opened your mouth, and there were eyes inside. The next day, 3 children vanished. No signs, only their footprints in the fog. Leanne stood at the edge of the rice field where the last was seen and listened. No wind, no birds, but faintly, very faintly, she heard singing. A lullaby. Her mother's lullaby, but warped, distorted. She followed the sound. step by step into the trees. The bamboo groaned above her. And then, Mermadavan, she heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Only this time it was behind her. She turned and saw her own footprint pressed into the mud. Just one. She hadn't stepped there. She backed away. Another step appeared. Then another. Her footprints, but made by something invisible. And they were walking toward her. She screamed, ran. Branches slapped her face, fog filled her mouth. She stumbled into a hollow and fell through the ground. She landed hard on damp roots and looked up. There were people hanging from the ceiling. No ropes, just suspended, eyes open, wide, terrified, their mouths sewn shut, their chests slowly rising and falling as if breathing through invisible tubes. And among them, a child, dangling upside down, eyes blank. It was one of the missing. Leon reached up, touched the boy's hand. It was ice cold, but he blinked, just once, and whispered with his mind, "They walk with your skin." Then he stopped blinking. Leon stepped back, and the fog inside the cavern shifted. A shape moved, thin, bone-like, its head brushing the ceiling. Too many joints, too many fingers. Its face, no face. Just a flat, mirror-like surface where a face should be. And as it turned toward her, her own face reflected back, but with eyes gouged out. She screamed. Salt in hand, she hurled the pouch. It hissed, burned the air like acid. The creature recoiled, shrieked, and vanished into the wall. Leon climbed out of the hollow, lungs burning, and in the dirt behind her the footprints reappeared. Her own, chasing her. She ran straight to the elders. Only two remained. They listened, pale. "The Shadow Walker has chosen her," one said. "She is no longer just seen, she is marked." "What does it want?" Leon asked. "Not you," said the other elder. "Your place." "What did it? Ashuri de one. It wants to become you." That night Leon stayed awake. Salt around her bed, blade under her pillow. And then the door creaked. She didn't open it. She watched. A hand slid in. Thin, long, translucent. It touched the wall, and her handprint appeared. Another arm followed. Then a leg. Then a copy of her. Same hair, same shirt, same scar above the eyebrow. But the eyes were blank, and the mouth smiled too wide. The copy looked around, tilted its head, then turned toward Thomas's bed. Nolian breathed. She threw the blade. It struck the wall. The copy dissolved into smoke and whispered, "One day he won't know the difference." In the morning, Leon's reflection was gone. The mirror showed her room, but not her. She tried water, metal, even her own shadow. No reflection. She was fading, being replaced. Each night the footsteps came closer. Each night her double walked more confidently, until finally one day, Thomas called her by a different name. "Lyra," he said. She froze. "What did you call me?" He blinked, confused. "That's your name, isn't it?" Her hands trembled. She rushed to the book. Its final page had changed. Now it read, "The vessel fractures, the forest smiles." Desperate, Leon returned to the altar. This time the fog let her pass. It welcomed her. Inside the clearing, someone stood waiting. It was her, the copy, smiling. But the smile was fading now. The eyes were bleeding. "You can't fight it," the double said. "You open the door, you let us in." Leon raised the silver blade. "Then I'll close it." The copy laughed. You are the door. We walk where you walk. We speak where you breathe. We watch as you sleep." Then the copy raised a hand, and every tree around the clearing groaned. Eyes opened in bark, in leaves, in the earth, watching, judging, feeding. Leon stabbed the blade into the altar. Light burst upward. A scream split the air, not hers, not the copy's, but something bigger, older. The copy caught fire. It smiled as it burned. "You can't kill a shadow," it whispered. Then vanished. The fog screamed and pulled back. For the first time in weeks, the sky was visible. Leon collapsed, sobbing. But something in her remained wrong. She was still the door, and somewhere out there, the footsteps still walked. The mark of Hatabala. Leon's hands had started bleeding in her sleep. Not from wounds, from symbols. Each morning, new lines and curves carved themselves into her palms, deep red and precise, as though etched by invisible blades. They didn't hurt, not really. They throbbed, with a rhythm that wasn't hers. It beat like a second heart, ancient alien buried under skin. The marks were changing too. On the first day, they looked like runes. On the second, like roots. By the third morning, they had formed a face with hollow eyes and a jaw unhinged in a silent scream. Lent wore gloves, but nothing could stop the villagers from noticing. "Look away," one old woman whispered. "She carries it, the mark." "She's the curse now," said another. "Hatabala walks in her blood." The nightmares returned in waves. But this time they didn't wait for her to fall asleep. They came while she was awake. She would blink and suddenly be back in the clearing, surrounded by bamboo with eyes. She'd turn and see her own grave fresh and open. Or she'd see Thomas' eyes stitched again, whispering, "It's inside you now." The visions didn't fade. They overlapped reality. One evening, as she stirred a pot of rice, her spoon began to melt, turning into a wet black finger. When she screamed, it snapped back into metal. But her hand was stained with soot, and her rice was gone. In its place, worms writhed. Lola had once warned her Hatabala feeds first on fear, then memory, then self. Leanne was running out of all three. It wasn't just her. The entire village was rotting. The well water turned to sour. Salt no longer held the fog back. Babies cried without stopping. Old people stopped sleeping altogether, afraid their souls would leave if they did. The trees near the fifth row began to bleed black sap. No one dared touch it. The mark on Leon's palm pulsed every time the sap oozed. And in the dead of night, she heard voices chant in a language she didn't know but understood anyway. "Return the vessel, return the face, return the breath." One night, Thomas vanished again. Not silently this time. He screamed. Leon jolted awake to the sound of him shrieking her name, the bamboo walls rattling, the fog booming like thunder outside. She ran out barefoot, chased the screams, through the trees, past the altar, down into the mud. She saw him dragged by something tall, skeletal, faceless, into the hollow earth. She leapt, and the ground swallowed them both. She landed on stone, deep below the forest floor, a circular chamber of roots and carvings. The walls pulsed with something like breath. Thomas lay in the center unconscious. The thing that dragged him slithered backward into the dark, its limbs snapping in reverse like broken puppet strings. And across the floor, drawn in blood and bone, was the mark of Hatabala, a massive glyph older than the village, carved deeper than any ritual. Leanne stepped closer. Her palm burned. The mark on her skin glowed, and the carving on the floor responded, humming low, a sound that split her ears and made her teeth ache. Then the eyes appeared. Dozens, all around the wall, watching, waiting. Then the fog bled through the stone itself, and from it stepped Hatabala, not the illusion, not the whispering mimic, the original. Its body was barely held together. Bones lashed with vines, skin stretched too thin across ribs. Its face was a mess of mouths and black stitches. And in its chest, a cage. Inside that cage was her mother. Leanne screamed. Hatabala opened all its mouths at once and exhaled. The fog exploded. Lion flew backward, hit the wall. Her blood splattered across the glyph, and the mark began to activate. The floor opened. The root cage rose from below. Hatabala stepped inside the glyph's center, and so did Leanne. Their eyes locked. Its were empty. Hers were full of fire. "Give her back," she growled. The demon twitched, then smiled horribly and whispered, "She gave herself for you." Leanne's knees buckled. "No." The voice changed, became her mother's. "I traded my life so you'd never carry this curse." Hatabala's cage glowed. "She gave me her name," it hissed, "so I could return through blood. But you broke the seal. You woke me." The fog poured into Leon's mouth. She choked, collapsed, and dreamed. In the dream, she was 6, sitting on the porch, her mother brushing her hair. "Always remember," she whispered. "Names are power." Leanne turned. "What's your real name, Nanai?" Her mother smiled sadly. "I gave it away to keep you safe." Leanne frowned. "To who?" The wind shifted. The bamboo swayed. To the watcher beneath the roots, she woke screaming, back in the chamber. Thomas still out cold, Hatabala circling her. The mark is a door, it hissed. Your palm is the key, your soul the price. Leon stared at her hands. The face carved there was smiling now. She stood, clenched her fists. I'm not your vessel, she said. The glyph trembled. Hatabala laughed a sound like bones grinding glass. You already are. It lunged. She slashed with a blade of silver from her belt. It cut through air, but the demon reeled hissing. Leon dove for Thomas. He stirred. Leon, I've got you, just hold on. Hatabala opened its cage, revealed her mother again, eyes-stitched arms raised. She whispered, Run! Leon turned, saw the glyph glowing brighter. If it finished, the seal would break. Hatabala would merge with her completely. So she did the only thing she could. She sliced her palm open and smeared the blood across the glyph backward, reversing the mark. Hatabala screamed. The earth shook. Roots snapped. Eyes closed. Light exploded from the stone. The cage cracked. The fog screamed, and the chamber began to collapse. Leon grabbed Thomas and climbed. Up the roots, through the dirt, back into the night air. Behind them the earth rumbled. The clearing cracked. A hole opened. And from it Hatabala howled, burning, writhing, trapped again. But before it vanished, it pointed at Leon and left her one word. Burned into the ground. Soon, back in the village, she collapsed. Thomas slept for 2 days straight. And when he woke, he remembered everything. Leon told no one about the cage, about her mother, or about the true meaning of the mark. But she knew. The seal had cracked. The glyph had been reversed. But the blood, her blood, had activated it first. Part of Hatabala now lived in her. And every night the fog came back. And she dreamed of roots, of being buried, of watching, and of a name whispered over and over in 1,000 dead tongues. Her name. Trapped beneath the forest floor, the earth had closed behind her, and the forest no longer breathed. It watched. That was the first thing Leon noticed when she stepped outside her hut after 3 days of fever and silence. The trees no longer swayed no matter the wind. The fog didn't swirl. The birds which once chirped cautiously at dawn had vanished completely. It was as if the forest had turned into a single enormous eye, and she had become the only thing worth seeing. Something had shifted beneath the bamboo. Thomas wouldn't talk about the chamber. He remembered everything he'd whispered as much, but he refused to speak it aloud. Each time she brought it up, he would clutch his head and mutter prayers in languages she didn't know. That night she awoke to find him kneeling in the dark, eyes wide, whispering to the ground. Leon called his name. He didn't answer. Only when she shook him did he blink, startled as though he had no idea where he was. I was listening, he said slowly. It's still down there. Hatabala isn't trapped, just sleeping, waiting. Leon showed him her hands. The mark had changed again. Now it looked like a spiral of branches, and in the center a small, perfectly carved door. She returned to the altar at dawn. The roots had grown thicker there. Black vines wound tightly around the stone, pulsing like veins. When she placed her palm on the surface, the glyph on her skin sank into the stone as if drawn to something beneath it. And she heard it, knocking. From below, 3 soft thuds, slow, steady. Then a pause. Then it started again. Knock, knock, knock. A rhythm that sounded wrong, like something pretending to be human. She stayed until nightfall listening. When she returned to the village, 4 homes were empty. No struggle, no blood, no trace. The wind carried only one sound now. Knock, 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 knock. The next night, Leon had a vision. But she wasn't asleep. She was walking past the fifth row of trees when the bamboo suddenly opened up, not cracked or split, but peeled like skin, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into dirt and roots. She should have run, but her feet stepped forward without her, as if she'd done it before. The steps whispered. Each root she brushed against called her name. The deeper she went, the louder the forest became, not with noise, but with memory. She remembered the day her mother screamed during a storm. She remembered being 5 and drawing strange symbols in the mud, unaware they were summoning seals. She remembered a voice saying, "The forest does not forget. It buries." At the bottom of the spiral, she found a door made entirely of teeth, and it opened inward. She awoke in her hut breathless. Her hand hurt. The glyph was bleeding again, but this time it wasn't hers. It dripped black blood, blood that hissed when it touched the floor. She wrapped her hand and grabbed her machete. Whatever was under the forest floor was calling her, and it wasn't going to stop. The next evening she followed the vision, past the fifth row, to the ancient tree where the bark had split and the roots trembled. There she found the entrance. It wasn't made of bamboo or stone. It was made of names, carved over each other, thousands. Some she recognized, her grandfather, her neighbors, even Thomas. When she touched the names, the door turned soft and opened. Inside was darkness that moved. She lit a torch and descended. The air below was thick, not with fog, but with memory. Whispers clung to her ears, pressing against her skull. She walked for what felt like hours. The tunnel twisted and shrank and widened again. She found old bones curled into fetal positions, eyes gouged, symbols carved into skulls. These weren't burial chambers. They were cages. Eventually, she reached a chamber lined with mirrors, except they didn't show her reflection. They showed versions of herself. One as a child, smiling and covered in dirt. One kneeling over her mother's grave, bleeding from the eyes. One dressed in black eyes sewn shut, whispering fog. And one smiling back at her eyes completely white. She smashed the mirror. It laughed anyway. Beyond the chamber was a mound of roots pulsing like a heart. A single voice came from inside. Soft, familiar. "Lian." She froze. It was her mother. "Nanay, Swilishran waited. Come closer." Lian reached out. The mound split, and they're bound in vines and glass, and memory was her mother's face. Only the face, stitched into the bark like a mask weeping black sap. "You can end this," the voice whispered. "Burn the mark. Let me go." How? You must give Hatabala your true name." Lian hesitated, then whispered, "What if I don't know it?" "You do. It was given to you in the womb. A name not of this world." "I don't remember." "You will." The roots tightened. "You must." Suddenly the floor beneath her collapsed. She tumbled into Hatabala's den. The den was alive. A hollow cavern of bone and vine filled with thousands of mouths, some screaming, some whispering, some simply breathing. Hatabala was waiting, but it looked different now. Taller, stronger, its cage empty. Lian realized her mother was fully consumed. The demon had taken her completely. Hatabala spoke without moving. "Your body remembers, your blood sings, give me the name." "No, you already called me. You summoned me again the moment you entered the chamber." Lian fell to her knees. The mark on her palm began to burn, not fire but truth. She saw herself as an infant cradled by a woman in white robes beneath a blood moon. A ritual. A voice, "This child is the last guardian. Her name shall bind the forest." And a word. One she didn't understand but felt etched into her bones. She whispered it, and the entire chamber screamed. Hatabala roared. The glyphs cracked. Roots thrashed. The mouths chanted, "She remembers. She awakens." The demon lunged, and Lian screamed the name again. This time she held the glyph in her palm upward. Let her blood pour freely into the ground. The forest took it. Roots recoiled. The seal reformed. The name circled the walls in flame. Hatabala burned, and as it faded into smoke, it whispered, "Names are never free. Yours is spoken, but the price is depth." Lian gasped as the earth opened beneath her again, and the forest swallowed her whole. When she awoke, she was beneath the bamboo, but deeper than ever. She could no longer feel her body. Only roots, only soil, only watching. Her voice was gone. but a new one had replaced it. The forest no longer whispered. It spoke through her now, and from the surface Thomas heard it, a chant rising through the ground. Trapped beneath the forest floor, she sleeps, but her eyes are open and watching, always. Bataya's forgotten ritual. The rain hadn't touched the ghost forest in over a week, and yet everything dripped. Thomas stood at the edge of the fifth row, machete in hand, staring at the trees that now seemed closer than before, as if the forest had moved forward during the night. He could feel her beneath the soil. Within, she wasn't dead, but she wasn't human anymore. He heard her voice in the wind, felt her breath in the fog. She was becoming something else. He just didn't know what. Back in the village, no one spoke above a whisper. Those who remained had begun sleeping in the chapel, huddled around candles that flickered even when there was no wind. Children cried in their sleep, not from nightmares, but from something deeper, memories they shouldn't have. Each morning, one of the older villagers would vanish. No screams, no footprints, just a thin line of ash leading to the forest. The elders called it the reclaiming, an old word, older than the village, older than Bataya. Thomas returned to the chamber that evening. He brought salt-blessed thread in a journal passed down from his grandfather, the last known ritual keeper of Bataya. Inside the book was a sketch, a double ring drawn around a human silhouette encased in bamboo leaves and spiral glyphs. The caption read, "The forgotten ritual to restore the guardian or replace her." Thomas stared at it for hours. He remembered the tales. When the forest chose a child, it was both a blessing and a curse. They became the link, the mouth, the vessel. And once chosen, there were only two endings: sacrifice or succession. The ritual needed 5 things, 5 objects buried beneath Bataya centuries ago, each representing one of the original guardians who sealed Hatabala the first time. They were Norahafamarn, the lantern that never dies, the binding thread of teeth, the mirror of one's true face, the bone flute of silence, the clay heart that beats without blood. Each item had to be retrieved from a different part of the forest. Each part was watched. He would need help. That night, Tomas called on Aling Rosa, the midwife who once delivered children under the blood moon and was said to speak the dead tongue. She came limping from the chapel with a pouch of herbs and a silver blade tied to her ankle. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. "The soil speaks, and Leon is not the first to be lost." Tomas asked if she would help him retrieve the artifacts. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in and whispered a single sentence. "Then you must not fear hearing your own death." The lantern that never dies was first. It lay buried beneath the roots of the crooked tree, a bent ancient giant whose bark pulsed faintly with light. Tomas and Rosa reached it just before dawn. They sprinkled salt in a circle and lit a red candle. The tree shuddered, its roots twisted upward like fingers revealing a hollow. Inside was the lantern glowing softly yet not casting light. When Thomas touched it, he saw Leon's face, but not as she was, as she would become. Her eyes were glass, her skin bark, her mouth stitched shut. He screamed and dropped the lantern. Rosa caught it. "You cannot carry this if you still love her." He nodded and let her hold it. One down. Next was the binding thread of teeth hidden in the spider mound, a place no one dared go since the day of screams 5 years ago. They ventured there at nightfall, guided by whispers. The ground was soft, wet. Every step made their skin crawl. When they reached the mound, they found it pulsing, covered in moving webs made of hair. A voice echoed from beneath. "Choose your mouth." Rosa pulled the silver blade and slit her palm. "I choose my truth," she hissed, then threw her blood onto the mound. The webs melted, revealing a coiled thread made of baby teeth wrapped tightly like a necklace. Thomas reached out. The thread snapped around his wrist and stayed. No blood, no pain, only weight. 2 down. They returned to the village to rest, but found another home empty, and a mirror broken in the chapel. Rosa paled. Hatabala is beginning the mirroring. What's that? Tomas asked. When the forest tries to replace the living with their worst selves. They didn't sleep. At dawn they journeyed to the mirror of one's true face, hidden in the swamp of mouths. They rode across black water lined with trees that wept. In the center, a small altar rose from the fog. On it, a mirror covered in moss and dried skin. Rosa touched it first. Nothing happened. Thomas followed, and his reflection smiled. Not in joy, in hunger. It whispered you would have left her. If she didn't scream, you would have run. He clenched his fists. I didn't. But you thought about it. The mirror cracked, then returned to stillness. They took it. 3 down. The bone flute of silence lay deeper, in the cave of echoes beneath a cliff shaped like a face screaming. They entered at dusk. The walls hummed. No echoes returned, only breath. And it wasn't theirs. They followed the path until they reached a pile of bones arranged in a spiral. At the center, a flute made of human femur carved with tiny symbols. Thomas lifted it. The air vanished. He couldn't speak. Rosa tried to say his name. No sound came. She grabbed his arm and pulled. Silence held on. Only when they reached the mouth of the cave did noise return, and Thomas fell to his knees. I saw her again, he gasped. But she was smiling. Rosa looked at the flute. It's not silence, it's refusal. The dead choose who to hear. 4 down. The final item was the clay heart that beats without blood. It was hidden beneath Bataya itself. They returned to the chamber. The roots had deepened, the spiral had grown, and the glyph on Thomas's chest burned. They entered without speaking, deeper than before, until they reached the crypt of the first guardians, a room lined with stone mass, each one weeping. In the center, a clay vessel shaped like a heart pulsed slowly. Thomas picked it up. It was warm, alive. He felt it beat in sync with his own. Rosa said nothing. She only stared at him, then at the mark on his wrist. Hatabala knows what you're doing. You cannot stop it, only delay it. Thomas looked down, and for a moment the heart in his hand stopped, then started again. 5 down. They had all the items, and the ritual had to begin before the 13th night, when the moon turned red and the forest opened fully. They gathered in the clearing behind the 5th row. Rosa drew the circles. Thomas placed the items in position. Each one whispered, pulsed, waited. Then Rosa took a deep breath and said, "Call her." Thomas hesitated. He whispered Leon's name. The fog parted, and she appeared, not walking, not floating, just there. Leon, but wrong. Her skin bark, eyes white, mouth stitched. She stepped into the circle, didn't speak, didn't blink, only waited. Rosa lit the lantern. The circle glowed. She blew the bone flute. No sound came, but the ground shook. Thomas wrapped the thread of teeth around Leon's wrist, and the clay heart began to beat faster. The mirror was last. He held it to her face, and saw Isharmarnemon himself, bleeding, smiling, chained. Leon didn't reflect anymore, because she wasn't just possessed. She was becoming the vessel, the new Hatabala. The ritual was too late. Suddenly, the thread of teeth snapped. The lantern flickered. The mirror shattered, and the clay heart burst into flame. Leon screamed not from her throat, but from every tree, every root, every shadow. The forest roared with her, and Rosa fell backward. "You waited too long," she cried. Thomas ran into the circle, held Leon, whispered the name again, the true name. The forest responded. The circle reformed in fire. The glyph burned in the air. Leon's eyes turned black, then clear, then back again. For 1 second she whispered, "I remember the ritual." Then everything went still. The next morning the forest was quiet. Too quiet. No fog, no sound, only stillness. Thomas awoke alone. The items were gone. The circle had vanished, and so had Rosa. In his palm the glyph remained, but it was no longer a spiral. It was a door, slightly open, inside the faint shape of a girl's face, smiling, waiting. Somewhere beneath the forest, Leon sat in the dark. The roots no longer held her. She no longer breathed. She no longer remembered pain. Only the ritual. Only the waiting. The next guardian would come. And when they did, she would teach them how to burn the forest from the inside. But not yet. First, she had to forget her name completely. When the trees bled black, the first drop of black sap slid down the bark with a slow, thick movement like blood from a deep wound. Micah watched frozen as the substance oozed from the tree he had touched. The pungent scent of rot filled his nose, and the air around him grew heavier, darker. The ghost forest was no longer merely haunted, it was bleeding. It had been 3 days since Ava had vanished. 3 long, grueling days of wandering the dense bamboo groves and twisted root paths with barely any sleep or food. The group Micah, Jen, Haru, and Kian was unraveling. The forest whispered constantly, not just at night anymore, but during the day. They were followed by laughter, footsteps, growls that echoed from nowhere, and the flicker of red eyes that vanished the moment they turned to look. But what Micah saw now was something new, something worse. He took a step back from the tree, but the black sap began spreading like veins, crawling across the bark, up the trunk, and along the branches as though the forest itself was reacting to him, as though it were awakening. Micah Jen called, rushing through the underbrush with Haru close behind. "We heard something. What's wrong?" "Don't touch it," Micah shouted, holding out a hand. They froze. The tree behind him had transformed. Its bark had begun to crack, split, and from within came a low, wet, squelching sound, as if something was writhing inside it. The mark, the same claw-like insignia from Ava's sketchbook, was now burned into the bark, dripping black blood from its center. Haru gasped. "That's Hatabala's seal." They had seen it before on the ancient altar in the Bataya shrine ruins, and carved into a child's skull they had unearthed days earlier. But never alive, never bleeding. "We need to go," Jen whispered. "Now?" "No," Micah said quietly. "We need to follow it." Jen stared at him, incredulous. "Follow the demon tree? Are you out of your mind?" But Micah's voice had changed, calmer, deeper, almost detached. "I saw her," he said, eyes glassy. "Ava. She was under the roots, alive." Jen and Haru exchanged glances. They'd all had visions in the forest. Hallucinations, memories, things that blurred the line between real and unreal. But none had felt like this. "I believe him," Haru said suddenly. Jen looked at him, shocked. "You what?" "This is a ritual forest. Everything is symbolic. Trees bleeding, the mark, Ava beneath the ground, it's all part of the pattern. This is Bataya's forgotten ritual. A sacrifice beneath the forest floor." Micah pointed toward the roots. "There's something under here." With their bare hands, they began to dig. It took hours. Mud under their nails, blood from their scraped fingers, and all the while the trees around them bled more furiously. Black sap oozed from every trunk. The air thickened with incense and decay. The bamboo groaned and bent unnaturally, as if resisting their efforts. But finally they uncovered something. Not Ava, not a body, but a stone door. Hidden beneath the earth, ancient and carved with writhing demonic figures that looked half human, half deer, their antlers entwined like thorny vines. The center of the door bore the full mark of Hatabala, now glowing faint red. "Help me open it," Micah said. They hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" Jen asked. Micah's hand was already on the stone. The moment he touched it, the forest screamed. It was not a sound made with vocal cords or breath. It was a psychic wail, a pressure wave of pain and rage that slammed into their skulls like 1,000 knives. They fell to the ground, clutching their heads, shrieking as the ground beneath them shook. The door cracked open, and the black mist flowed out. The tunnel beneath the forest floor was narrow, suffocating. The walls pulsed with a dark, resinous slime that seemed alive. The deeper they descended, the more time distorted. Their watches spun erratically. Light bent, and shadows moved with no source. But they kept going, because Ava was down here. Micah could hear her voice, calling him. They emerged into a cavern. It was massive, dome-shaped, and at its center stood an altar of bones, hundreds of rib cages, skulls, femurs all twisted together into a grotesque throne. And seated atop it was Hatabala. Hatabala was not a being, it was many. Its form flickered constantly, sometimes a woman in a blood-red veil, sometimes a deer-headed priest, sometimes a swarm of mouths stitched across a shroud of flesh. Its antlers curved through the ceiling like roots. Its face was every face Micah had ever feared. "You came as it whispered. The final rites can begin." Then Ava stepped out from behind the altar. Her skin was pale, but her eyes were alive. And yet, not quite her. "Micah," she said. "Ava." He ran to her, but she held up a hand. Her arms were tattooed, now covered in the same symbols that lined the altar, glowing faintly. "I'm part of it now," she said. "I saw everything, the forest and the curse. Bataya was never just a place, it's a prison." "For Hatabala?" Haru asked. "For what came before Hatabala," she replied. "Hatabala is the jailer, the guardian, but we fed it with fear, with blood." Jen whispered, "You're saying we made it stronger?" Ava nodded, "And now it's no longer guarding anything." Hatabala rose. Its antlers scraped the ceiling. Its mouth opened wide. "You brought the final offering," Hatabala said, motioning to Micah. "I didn't." "Yes, your guilt, your doubt, your need to save what was already lost. You've opened the last gate." Micah backed away, but his feet were rooted. Literally. Vines had crawled from the floor, wrapping around his ankles, climbing his legs. The floor beneath him had turned to bark. "Run!" he shouted, but it was too late. The altar exploded in a storm of black light. Jen and Haru were thrown back. Ava was pulled into the air, arms outstretched as Hatabala's form merged with hers. They spiraled together like a ritual rebirth. The trees above bled harder. Outside, the villagers would soon see the forest darken into an endless night. Below, the throne of bones cracked. The forest was rebirthing its god. Micah's mind fractured. He was in the forest, a child again, hearing the whispers of his dead brother. He was in school, failing to answer when Ava had needed him. He was in the cave, unable to move as Hatabala devoured every memory. "You are guilt," Hatabala whispered, "and guilt feeds me." Micah screamed. He reached inside his pocket, pulled the last remnant of Ava's old sketchbook. A page she had drawn long before all this. It showed a woman breaking the antlers of the beast. A ritual of defiance. Micah staggered toward the altar, holding up the sketch. "You're not a god," he hissed. "You're a parasite." Hatabala howled. The cavern shook. "You need hosts, belief, worship. Without us." Micah reached into the roots that bound him and did something unthinkable. He bit his own thumb, drew blood, and pressed it against the mark on Ava's chest. A flash of red, a scream from the demon, and Ava fell from the air. The cavern split open, light pouring through the cracks. Sunlight. Hatabala shrieked in pain. Micah grabbed Ava, pulled her away from the altar. The forest above began to tremble. Trees bent backward. The sky split. The bleeding trees burst into black mist and dissolved. The ritual was collapsing. Haru and Jen helped them through the tunnel as the whole underground temple crumbled. The bones cracked. The altar disintegrated. They emerged into daylight, and the ghost forest burned. It didn't burn like fire. It burned like memory. The bamboo shriveled. The roots died. The whispers faded into silence. Hatabala's presence drained away with the black mist, leaving behind only trees, dead quiet and still. They walked until their legs gave out, collapsing in a field of wild grass, far from the forest's edge. Ava lay in Micah's arms, alive, but different. They all were. The news called it a freak forest collapse, but the locals knew better. Some whispered of a beast driven away by the prayers of the desperate. Others claimed it was the forest finally claiming its dead. But those who had seen the trees bleed black never returned. Micah never spoke of it again, but every night he dreamed of antlers. And behind them, a girl, watching from beneath the forest floor. When the trees bled black, the first drop of black sap slid down the bark with a slow, thick movement, like blood from a deep wound. Micah watched frozen as the substance oozed from the tree he had touched. The pungent scent of rot filled his nose, and the air around him grew heavier, darker. The ghost forest was no longer merely haunted, it was bleeding. It had been 3 days since Ava had vanished. 3 long, grueling days of wandering the dense bamboo groves and twisted root paths with barely any sleep or food. The group Micah, Jen, Haru, and Kian was unraveling. The forest whispered constantly, not just at night anymore, but during the day. They were followed by laughter, footsteps, growls that echoed from nowhere, and the flicker of red eyes that vanished the moment they turned to look. But what Micah saw now was something new, something worse. He took a step back from the tree, but the black sap began spreading like veins, crawling across the bark, up the trunk, and along the branches, as though the forest itself was reacting to him, as though it were awakening. Micah Jen called, rushing through the underbrush, with Haru close behind. "We heard something, what's wrong?" "Don't touch it," Micah shouted, holding out a hand. They froze. The tree behind him had transformed. Its bark had begun to crack, split, and from within came a low, wet, squelching sound, as if something was writhing inside it. The mark, the same claw-like insignia from Ava's sketchbook, was now burned into the bark, dripping black blood from its center. Haru gasped, "That's Hatabala's seal." They had seen it before on the ancient altar in the Bataya shrine ruins, and carved into a child's skull they had unearthed days earlier. But never alive, never bleeding. "We need to go," Jen whispered. "Now." "No," Micah said quietly. "We need to follow it." Jen stared at him, incredulous. "Follow the demon tree? Are you out of your mind?" But Micah's voice had changed, calmer, deeper, almost detached. "I saw her," he said, eyes glassy. "Ava. She was under the roots, alive." Jen and Haru exchanged glances. They'd all had visions in the forest. Hallucinations, memories, things that blurred the line between real and unreal. But none had felt like this. "I believe him," Haru said suddenly. Jen looked at him, shocked. "You what?" "This is a ritual forest. Everything is symbolic. Trees bleeding the mark, Ava beneath the ground, it's all part of the pattern. This is Bataya's forgotten ritual. A sacrifice beneath the forest floor." Micah pointed toward the roots. "There's something under here." With their bare hands, they began to dig. It took hours, mud under their nails, blood from their scraped fingers, and all the while the trees around them bled more furiously. Black sap oozed from every trunk. The air thickened with incense and decay. The bamboo groaned and bent unnaturally, as if resisting their efforts. But finally they uncovered something. Not Ava, not a body, but a stone door. Hidden beneath the earth, ancient, and carved with writhing demonic figures that looked half human, half deer, their antlers entwined like thorny vines. The center of the door bore the full mark of Hatabala, now glowing faint red. "Help me open it," Micah said. They hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" Jen asked. Micah's hand was already on the stone. The moment he touched it, the forest screamed. It was not a sound made with vocal cords or breath. It was a psychic wail, a pressure wave of pain and rage that slammed into their skulls like 1,000 knives. They fell to the ground, clutching their heads, shrieking as the ground beneath them shook. The door cracked open, and the black mist flowed out. The tunnel beneath the forest floor was narrow, suffocating. The walls pulsed with a dark, resinous slime that seemed alive. The deeper they descended, the more time distorted. Their watches spun erratically. Light bent and shadows moved with no source. But they kept going, because Ava was down here. Micah could hear her voice, calling him. They emerged into a cavern. It was massive, dome-shaped, and at its center stood an altar of bones. Hundreds of rib cages, skulls, femurs, all twisted together into a grotesque throne. And seated atop it was Hatabala. Hatabala was not a being, it was many. Its form flickered constantly, sometimes a woman in a blood-red veil, sometimes a deer-headed priest, sometimes a swarm of mouths stitched across a shroud of flesh. Its antlers curved through the ceiling like roots. Its face was every face Micah had ever feared. "You came," it whispered. "The final rites can begin." Then Ava stepped out from behind the altar. Her skin was pale, but her eyes were alive, and yet not quite her. Micah," she said. "Ava." He ran to her, but she held up a hand. Her arms were tattooed, now covered in the same symbols that lined the altar, glowing faintly. "I'm part of it now," she said. "I saw everything, the forest, the curse. Bataya was never just a place, it's a prison." "For Hatabala?" Haru asked. "For what came before Hatabala," she replied. "Hatabala is the jailer, the guardian, but we fed it, with fear, with blood." Jen whispered, "You're saying we made it stronger?" Ava nodded, "And now it's no longer guarding anything." Hatabala rose. Its antlers scraped the ceiling. Its mouths opened wide. "You brought the final offering," Hatabala said, motioning to Micah. "I didn't turn a shurihi on Tim." "Yes, your guilt, your doubt, your need to save what was already lost. You've opened the last gate." Micah backed away, but his feet were rooted, literally. Vines had crawled from the floor, wrapping around his ankles, climbing his legs. The floor beneath him had turned to bark. "Run!" he shouted, but it was too late. The altar exploded in a storm of black light. Jen and Haru were thrown back. Ava was pulled into the air, arms outstretched as Hatabala's form merged with hers. They spiraled together like a ritual rebirth. The trees above bled harder. Outside, the villagers would soon see the forest darken into an endless night. Below, the throne of bones cracked. The forest was rebirthing its god. Micah's mind fractured. He was in the forest, a child again, hearing the whispers of his dead brother. He was in school, failing to answer when Ava had needed him. He was in the cave, unable to move, as Hatabala devoured every memory. "You are guilt," Hatabala whispered, "and guilt feeds me." Micah screamed. He reached inside his pocket, pulled the last remnant of Ava's old sketchbook. A page she had drawn long before all this. It showed a woman breaking the antlers of the beast, a ritual of defiance. Micah staggered toward the altar, holding up the sketch. "You're not a god," he hissed. "You're a parasite." Hatabala howled. The cavern shook. "You need hosts, belief, worship. Without us." Micah reached into the roots that bound him and did something unthinkable. He bit his own thumb, drew blood, and pressed it against the mark on Ava's chest. A flash of red, a scream from the demon, and Ava fell from the air. The cavern split open, light pouring through the cracks. Sunlight. Hatabala shrieked in pain. Micah grabbed Ava, pulled her away from the altar. The forest above began to tremble. Trees bent backward. The sky split. The bleeding trees burst into black mist and dissolved. The ritual was collapsing. Haru and Jen helped them through the tunnel as the whole underground temple crumbled. The bones cracked. The altar disintegrated. They emerged into daylight, and the ghost forest burned. It didn't burn like fire. It burned like memory. The bamboo shriveled. The roots died. The whispers faded into silence. Hatabala's presence drained away with the black mist, leaving behind only trees dead quiet and still. They walked until their legs gave out, collapsing in a field of wild grass far from the forest's edge. Ava lay in Micah's arms, alive, but different. They all were. The news called it a freak forest collapse, but the locals knew better. Some whispered of a beast driven away by the prayers of the desperate. Others claimed it was the forest finally claiming its debt, but those who had seen the trees bleed black never returned. Micah never spoke of it again, But every night he dreamed of antlers, and behind them, Serena, a girl, watching from beneath the forest floor. Hatabala's curse awakens. They thought it was over. They thought laying the girl to rest, acknowledging her pain, giving her voice back would be enough. It wasn't, because the girl was never the curse. She was the key. And now that the key had been turned, Hatabala stirred. Micah woke to antlers scratching at his bedroom window. Not scratching the glass, scratching his dreams. The sound echoed through the empty corridors of his mind, tearing through memories, digging into things he'd buried since the forest. He jolted upright. Ava was already standing at the doorway, barefoot, eyes wide, her breath visible in the summer heat. "He's awake," she whispered. Who, Micah asked, though he knew. Hatabala. That night the news spread quickly across the region. Birds dying in midair. Livestock found twisted, bent at impossible angles, eyes missing. And in the forest, trees were turning faster than they could be cut. They didn't grow, they arrived. Whole sections of the ghost forest reappeared overnight in different places, as if it were moving. Jen, now fully drawing again, sent Micah a sketch. She didn't remember drawing it, but it showed a stag-like figure with branching antlers that bled from the tips. Its body made of roots and bone. Its face a blank mask. No mouth, no eyes. Just silence. Hatabala. Haru, after days of silence, called them to the shrine. His voice trembled. He's returning through the girl, but not the one you think. Micah frowned. Ava. No, Haru whispered. Jen. They stared. What are you talking about? Haru lit incense. His hands shook as he drew a series of binding circles in chalk. I looked him through the scrolls. The girl who spoke to shadows, she wasn't alone. There was another. A twin born in silence, but one embraced the shadows. The other, he pointed at Jen's drawing, became the vessel. Jen began sleepwalking. Each night she disappeared into the fields surrounding the village. Always barefoot, always humming something no one recognized. Micah followed her once. She led him to a clearing. At the center was a stone altar, one they had never seen before, covered in handprints, children's handprints, carved deep into the stone. Jen knelt beside it and whispered, "He's almost ready." Then her eyes turned black, and she screamed. It took all three of them to drag her back. At dawn, she awoke with no memory, but her arms were covered in symbols, the same ones Ava used to draw. Only these bled ink when touched. They returned to the old school building. It was different. Not older, not more broken, but wrong. Each hallway looped into the next impossibly. The windows looked out into forests that shouldn't be there. Sometimes Ava's reflection blinked after she did, and in the basement the diary was gone. Only a single phrase carved into the concrete remained. Let him finish what they started. Haru believed the curse wasn't just spiritual, it was ancestral. The original villagers, the ones who banished the girl, had made a deal. To keep her silent, they gave part of themselves to the forest, fed it their fear, their guilt. Hatabala was never summoned. He was invited. And now, with the girl's silence broken, that deal had unraveled. He was coming to collect. Micah had another dream. He stood in a field of dead trees. Each tree bore the face of someone he knew. Ava, Jen, Haru, even his own? Hatabala stood at the center. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The antlers moved like antennae, plucking thoughts from Micah's head. You brought them to me. You fed me. You remembered. And now you belong. Micah awoke screaming. Ava was waiting. I think I know how to stop him, she said. But it's not simple. She handed him a torn page from the shrine scrolls. It showed a ritual. The rebinding. 4 elements: fire, blood, bone, shadow. Each to be offered by a vessel who had touched the curse. They would need all 4. Or the forest would walk again. Fire Ava. She burned the first sigil with her own breath. Her skin blistered, but she never flinched. Blood Micah. He sliced open his palm, letting the blood drip onto the altar stone in the forest. It hissed and sizzled as if the ground drank it. Bone Haru. From the old temple, he brought the remains of a monk who once sealed the demon during a war. Buried in silence. The skull was still smiling. Shadowgen. She stood in the heart of the forest, arms outstretched. Let the shadows enter her lungs. And whispered, I remember you. The ritual began at dusk. 4 corners. 4 offerings. The air trembled. The trees twisted. And then, oh, when? Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The wrong kind. The kind before an earthquake. The kind before someone screams. The ground split. From it rose a creature taller than the tallest tree. Its antlers cracked the sky. Its body a hollowed forest, writhing with vines made of tongues. It had no face. Only a mask made of children's hands. Hatabala. Awakened. Jen stepped forward. Something in her changed. Her eyes blackened. She smiled. He needs a host, she said. He always has. The girl was just a doorway. But I'm the house. Before they could stop her, she plunged her hands into the ground. The roots shot up, piercing her skin, wrapping around her spine. She didn't scream. She laughed. And Hatabala's mask split open, revealing 100 teeth made of bark and broken prayer beads. Ava lunged forward. No. But Haru held her back. We can't pull her out now. She's inside it. Micah dropped to his knees. One nest what do we Kurnum? Ava pulled something from her pocket. The original talisman. It was cracked, faded, but still warm. We finished the rebinding, she said, by offering the anchor. What anchor? Ava looked at Micah. You. Micah blinked. What do you want to one? You're the one who brought us here. The one who crossed the veil. The one who bled first. But I didn't know. That doesn't matter, Haru said. You carried the curse. You fed it. Micah looked at Ava, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry. He nodded. I know. He stepped into the center of the ritual circle. The forest began to fold around him like paper burning inward. Voices screamed from the trees. Hatabala howled. Jen screamed his name, only it wasn't her voice anymore. It was all of them. The villagers, the girl, the trees, the mouths without tongues. Micah closed his eyes, held the talisman, whispered the final phrase. In the name of the forgotten, the cursed and the silent, I return what was taken. He pressed the talisman to his chest and vanished. Everything stopped. The trees froze. The screams died. Hatabala staggered. Then Juan collapsed. The antlers shattered into dust. The roots recoiled. And from the empty husk, Jen fell, breathing, alive. Micah didn't return. Not that day. Not the next. Not for months. They buried the talisman where he had vanished. Planted a tree. It never grew leaves. Ava left the village. So did Haru. Jen stayed. She drew every day. Mostly forests. Sometimes a face she couldn't quite finish. A face with eyes full of pain. And peace. 1 year later, on the night the moon turned black, the tree bloomed. Just once. Blood-red petals. And at its base, a single footprint. Still warm. The final night in Ghost Forest. It started with a knock. 3 soft taps against the window of Jen's cottage. But she lived alone now. and the knock came from inside the glass. She didn't scream. Not anymore. Jen simply opened the curtain and stared. Outside, the ghost forest was no longer black. It shimmered with a strange copper glow, as if the trees were rusting in place, as if time had finally caught up with it. A single red petal drifted down and landed on her windowsill. Then she heard it. "Come back," Micah's voice, calling her from the roots. She hadn't told anyone, not even Ava. But the tree they planted, the one that never grew, had begun to change. It wasn't just blooming, it was listening. Every night Jen stood before it and whispered what she remembered. And every night the tree whispered back. At first it was nonsense, half-formed words, echoes. But last night it said his name. Tonight it said hers. Ava returned on the third day of the bloom. She hadn't planned to, but something in her chest had pulled her eastward, back to Bataya, back to the ghost forest. She found Jen sitting beneath the tree, eyes closed, whispering to the bark. Ava approached slowly. "Are you talking to him?" Jen nodded. "He's close, but he's not free." Ava's heart tightened. "We ended it." Jen opened her eyes. "No, we paused it." That evening, the village sky turned orange, though no sunset. Bats flew in spirals, slamming into walls. All clocks stopped at 3:03, and in the woods, something began to dig its way up. Haru arrived from the mountain shrine by foot. He had seen the signs. "All 4 seals have cracked," he told them. The rebinding was temporary, because Hatabala was never fully sealed. Part of him remained trapped in Micah. Jen's voice was a whisper. "He's trying to come back." Ava frowned. "Micah." "No," Haru said. "Hatabala." The footprints returned that night. They started at the old shrine, then crossed the rice fields, and ended just outside Jen's window. Not barefoot, hooved. Each print bled sap. Jen awoke that night gasping for air. She had dreamt of a river of mouths all calling her name. In the center floated a boy with thorns in his chest. Micah. But his eyes weren't his. They were black pits filled with whispering stars. She didn't wait. She grabbed her sketchbook and ran into the forest. Ava caught up with her at the clearing. The stone altar had cracked open. From it, thick black roots spilled out, twisting, writhing, pulsing. In the middle stood a figure. Micah, or what looked like him. His skin was pale bark. His voice echoed even when he didn't speak. "Yeah, Mom." She stepped closer. "Well, Micah," a slow nod. But Ava felt it. Something was off. "You're not him," Ava whispered. The figure tilted its head. "No," it said. "I'm what's left." Jen didn't move. Tears welled in her eyes. "But you remember me." It smiled. And for a moment Ava saw it. The real Micah trapped beneath, flickering like a candle in a storm. Then the ground exploded. The forest shook. From the altar a shadow erupted, towering, massive, formed of all the failed bindings, all the forgotten names. Hatabala reborn. This time he wore Micah's face like a mask. And the voice, "Shikshir," a chorus of guilt, grief, memory. Every scream they ever heard, every soul that never left. Jen clutched her chest. "He's using Micah to break the final seal." Haru shouted over the wind, "Then we break him first." He threw down 3 scrolls, ancient, soaked in deer blood. They burned instantly, summoning a ring of protection around the altar. Ava stepped inside with Jen. "We have to pull Micah out." Jen nodded. "I'm going in." "No." But before Ava or Haru could stop her, Jen stepped through the veil of writhing roots and into Hatabala's form. The world vanished. She stood in a room made of branches. 1,000 doors, each labeled with a memory. She ran past them. Her childhood, the forest, the school, the blood. Then she saw it. Micah's door. She opened it. He sat on the floor, cradling a red petal. "Is it spring already?" he asked. Jen fell to her knees. "It's ending." He looked up. His eyes were full of tears. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "I know," she whispered. "You tried to save us." He shook his head, but I let him in. Jen touched his hand. "Then let me in now." Outside, Ava chanted. Haru drew blood from his palms, sealing the final sigils. Hatabala screamed. The trees burned. The stars fell. And in the center of it all, Jen kissed Micah's forehead. "I forgive you." And the mask shattered. A pulse exploded from the altar. Roots evaporated. The forest bent backward, howling, writhing, then silencing. The wind stopped. The air calmed. And at the center of the clearing, Jen lay unconscious, Micah in her arms, alive. They never spoke of what happened after. Not in full, but the forest changed. The trees no longer whispered. They sang. The villagers returned. The shrine was rebuilt, and the altar sealed with iron. No one entered the ghost forest again, not even the wind. Years later, on the anniversary of the last night, Ava returned to the tree. It had grown tall, strong, blooming red every spring. Micah sat beneath it, sketching. Jen leaned beside him, painting the horizon. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because the forest was listening. And for the first time in centuries, it was quiet.